Well, let's get on with the main event. I know many of you might not know who Dave Rubin is. For those of us who still have VCRs flashing 12, we have no idea who this guy is or what this intellectual dark web is. So I got to get a young guy to explain it to us. Tyler, where are you? Why don't you introduce our speaker, because you're young and you have hair, you bastard.
Well, our keynote speaker tonight started his online media career on the popular left-wing YouTube channel called The Young Turks. But like so many Democrats today, he's found that he was quickly being left behind by the left. He found his colleagues were getting harder and harder to have discussions with, especially if he disagreed. Rather than follow them into their bubbles, he decided to strike out on his own and start a new channel on which he could have meaningful, rational conversations with people from across the political spectrum. With guests such as Thomas Sowell, Peter Thiel, and Jordan Peterson, and many others, Dave has become the Larry King of the new generation, minus the suspenders. Thank God. Please help me welcome to the stage member of the intellectual dark web and host of the Rubin Report, Dave Rubin.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I've done a bunch of events in the past year, probably about 100 events. I think that was the first time I've ever gotten an intro where they said, "You probably don't know Dave Rubin." So now I feel like I really have to work tonight. All right, I'm going to work. I should tell you that I come here from the progressive dystopia of Los Angeles. So I just want to say it's nice to be in a room where you're allowed to say the words freedom and liberty without the threat of being arrested. So if you guys are worried, it's interesting. There's been a certain theme here that's very consistent with some of the things that I talk about on my show. So very quickly, for those of you that don't know me, I was on the Young Turks, which is a far left progressive network. I considered myself a lefty and a progressive my whole life. I consider myself a classical liberal, which is in line with libertarian ideas. And I would say if you're basically a classical liberal now, if you believe in the individual, if you believe in the light touch of government, really only when needed, if you believe that states should have individual rights so that this country can be the incredible experiment that the founders set up, that we have far more in common than we have apart. But one of the things that I think is interesting is that what you guys are describing here in Colorado is exactly what I'm seeing all over the country. I toured with Jordan Peterson this last year, and we did about 120 stops in about 20 countries, but primarily in the United States, about 100 stops. And this thing, this sort of amorphous socialist blob that has now become mainstream, these were ideas that were completely outside of the Overton window really 5-10 years ago. 5 or 10 years ago have now become mainstream ideas. And that's what we're all sort of fighting right now. And you know, one of the things that I try to do on my show is I sit down with all sorts of people. So I'll have far lefties, and I'll have socialists, and I'll have libertarians, and I'll have conservatives, and what I try to do is get people to expose their ideas. And really, I'm a firm believer that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I'm finding something really interesting lately, which is that people that are center-right, so some of the things that I just described, if you're a classical liberal or a libertarian or a conservative, the ideas that I think we're all talking about now, that we all care about, are actually becoming really refined and really good. So for those of you that don't know me, for the set of you that don't, for the younger people that do know me, that wasn't a shot at anyone's age, although it sounded like it. You're all on the computer now, right? Okay, so I get it. So the younger people know, okay, we can do this. What I'm realizing is that the de facto way that you come out of school these days, the way that you get your information, all of these things, is you basically everyone comes out with sort of a lefty, progressive view of the world. There, if you listen to the media, if you listen to what's being taught on college campuses, if you listen to everything that's sort of mainstream, it's sort of Democrats and lefties and progressives, they're the good guys, they're the tolerant ones, and everyone outside of that, you know, the scary conservatives and the Republicans and the rest of it, that somehow these are the racists, these are the people who only care about money or something along those lines. And what I'm finding, which is absolutely amazing because I'm seeing it in real time, is I am seeing a group of young people now who are finding out that the only solution actually is not what they're being sold, which is that the government should solve everything. It's that the government should have pretty much nothing to do with your life. That is what I have come to believe. I really have. I cannot, and someone can help me out, you can shout something out if you can think of it. I cannot think of a problem that I might have that I would go, you know, the government, that's who I want to help me out with this. There's almost nothing. There really is almost nothing. But it's not just a battle about small government and little government. What it really is happening right now is we really are at an inflection point in this country where we have to decide what kind of world we want to live in. And usually when I go speak at college campuses, I try something, and this is with the 18 to 22 set, and I'll try it here tonight because I think it really exemplifies sort of what's happening in the country right now. So does anyone in this room have it worse than their grandparents? Anyone? Nobody, or you're very shy, but I'll take that as a nobody. And you really have to think about that. You know, America was set up with what I believe to be the greatest man-made documents of how to have a functioning society, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And we didn't do everything perfect, right? We know that the founders owned slaves. We know that women couldn't vote. We know that there was slavery. Gays couldn't vote. I mean, a litany of things that we could go across that we did wrong. But the arc has always bent towards more justice. My grandparents, both my grandfathers fought in World War II. I don't have to fight in a war. We have done something in America that is good. Everyone still wants to come here, right? Nobody's leaving. Nobody leaves. Lena Dunham, all the people from Hollywood, they're still here. I bought them a ticket. They're all still here. They never leave. And by the way, that's one of my favorite ones because it's a great flip on how these people operate because they keep telling you how horrible America is. And then at the same time, what do they also want? Open borders. So they want everyone to share in the horror that is the United States of America. It's all very confusing. It's very confusing. But what I can tell you is as I've had these conversations with people and as I've traveled the country, what I've realized there really is a growing liberty movement. There really is. There are young people that really are paying attention to these ideas, and it's because of YouTube and podcasts and people like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan. There are conversations being had right now that are fighting, that are turning the tides on some of this. And that's why I'm so thrilled to be here. And it's like, wow, I can feel it in this room. You guys have had an incredible track record of liberty in this state. And it sounds like you could be losing some of that. And it's like, I don't know what else there is to fight for. I actually have no idea as a human being what else there is to fight for than your ability to live your life as you see fit. And yeah, thanks. I know I'm not supposed to go too long here. How are we doing? We're doing all right? Okay. So when I started breaking out of the sort of the progressive group think, because that really is what it is, I realized that there were so few people that were actually having honest arguments. I'll tell you one little story about when I really had a wake-up moment. I was on the Young Turks, and they were playing a clip of Fox News, and I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with David Webb, who's on Sirius XM Patriot, and he hosts for Sean Hannity often. He's a conservative. He happens to be black, so he's a black conservative. And they were playing a clip of David Webb, and one of the other hosts, I was on a panel with, I think, 4 hosts, and one of the other hosts said, "Look at that guy. Look at that token black guy. Look at that Uncle Tom." And suddenly everything that I had been thinking that was wrong with the left, that was wrong with the progressives, who were constantly preaching tolerance and preaching about diversity and telling you how wonderful they are and everyone else is evil, I suddenly saw really what this thing was. That here was a man, David Webb, I should mention, is a friend of mine, and we had shows together on SiriusXM years before that. So I'm sitting there, and here's a man announcing that my friend is a sellout and an Uncle Tom, and I know David to be a forthright, good, decent human being. And I thought, this is it. This is what the progressives do. They have laid these labels on everyone else about how racist they are and how bigoted they are and how homophobic they are and the rest of these things, when in fact, here's a black man who happens to not think the way they want him to think, and then they feel that they can say the worst type of thing that you could say to somebody, that he's an Uncle Tom or self-hating black person or something like that. And there was a series of these types of moments where I sort of woke up to what was going on there. And now I think everybody sees it. So for some of the younger people who I met tonight, it's like, there's a reason that everyone, say under, I'm 42, but I would say everyone basically under 45 or so has basically tuned out of CNN. Actually, how many of you over 45 are watching CNN these days? I hope not that many of you. And there's a reason for it, because they've confused us and they've had us feel that if you have 8 boxes and listen to, a former Republican pundit and a campaign manager here and all of these things, that you will learn anything. But what they've kept us doing is just fighting with each other. So what I try to do on my show, and I think what we're going to do a little bit of tonight, is actually unpack some ideas. Because I think if we can do that, I think these are the right ideas. They may not be the popular ideas at the moment because they're not easy. It's not easy to say to somebody, you know what, it's your life, go do it. We're not going to give you everything. We're not going to give you free college. We're not going to give you universal basic income, or we're just not going to give you endless handouts. We're not going to do that. It's much easier, right? What's the easy thing to do is just to say to people, well, we'll give you this, we'll give you free college, which, by the way, what they don't tell you, I mean, they're really stealing something from you, because as you guys know, there's nothing actually really free, so you've got to take it from someone. But it's not even that. What they're stealing from young people when they say, well, we're going to give you free college, and we're going to give you universal basic income, and we're going to give you all of these things, what they're stealing is their basic ability to do the most important thing that they can do as humans, which is figure out what their life's adventure is. And by the way, when Bernie says free college for everybody, well, it's not just that he wants everybody to be smart and learn about capitalism and freedom, right? I mean, we know, right, I'm pretty sure that's not what's going to be happening there. What we know is that he wants to funnel people into these free schools so that they will be brainwashed with the very ideas that are actually the antithesis of the founders' intentions. So that's sort of what we're up against right now. But really, if nothing else, if you've never seen my show and you're worried about these things, you should know that there are a ton of young people right now who are starting to get it. And the best thing that you can do, however you do it in your own life, is help empower them to be brave, because it takes a little bravery. That's what it's taking right now, to say, I don't think how everyone wants me to think. And you know what's going to come for you. There is a mob. We live in a sort of outrage culture that has a mob mentality, and if you're online, you've probably seen it, and they'll come after your job, and they'll say all the worst things about you, and you have to sort of live through it. But I've lived through it, and I've seen other people live through it. And the more of us that start speaking out, the more of us that realize, whoa, we've got it better than our grandparents. Whoa, everyone still wants to come here. Nobody wants to leave. That things have consistently gotten better, and things are getting better all the time. If you don't believe me, check out a great website, humanprogress.org, where, are you familiar with Human Progress? They are doing, you never hear this. You never hear this. There is more green on planet Earth than ever before. Infant mortality rates are lower than ever. There are all sorts of numbers to show that it's not as bad as we're constantly being told it is. So I would say that things are hopeful, but the only way that they'll remain hopeful is if we can talk some of this out, and I believe that's what John and I are going to do right now. Are we going to talk it out right now? All right. Thank you guys very much. Let's talk it out, John. Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah, it is. So what I'd like to do is act like a translator because I kind of know what you're talking about, and they've kind of heard of the interwebs. So I thought this would be a good way to get this out. First, I need a definition. For a lot of us, the big thing that brought us together was talk radio. That finally we heard things that sounded good from Mike Rosen and Pete Boyles and Rush and other folks. And now that is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and I hate to think that younger people, when I started listening to Rosen 25 years ago, what are they listening to now? What is the intellectual dark web? How does it work?
Well, first off, don't worry. If you're an AM radio person and you listen to Rush and some of these guys and some of the numbers are changing and they're not on stations anymore, I mean, look, everyone in this room has an iPhone or something that's the equivalent in their pocket. And what that gives you...
No, most of them have flip phones in their pockets, and a couple of them still have the thing that you give me Roxville 384.
There's an odd heckling of you guys here tonight. Everyone's got some way to connect to that internet thing out there. And what is happening is, while traditional forms of media are disappearing, I mean, if CNN wasn't on in airports, it pretty much wouldn't be on. I mean, that's a fact these days. And people are tuning into podcasts, so you can be listening to podcasts while you work out, while you're doing your commute, when you're in your car, whatever it is. You can watch these videos on YouTube, and there's another beauty to it, which is if you're in, so it's 10, 15 years ago, and you're listening to radio station, you can hear an idea, but then you're on your commute, and maybe it sort of marinates in your brain for a while, and then you just kind of let it go, or maybe you think about talking to somebody about it. But now, the technology is incredible. I mean, you can be clipping clips, send them to friends, you can tweet things out, you can share information. I mean, for the group over here at this table that has been nodding along with me the entire time, and I see you guys, they're sharing information in a different way, and they're able to break out of this thing, because mainstream is basically just giving you lefty talking points all the time, and it's really hard to break out of that.
The beautiful thing about talk radio is that it is a two-way communication, which is when you're on talk radio, anybody can pick up their phone and challenge you and correct you, which is why when the left tried talk radio with Air America, even though they threw lots of money at it, it never took, because they could never handle that instant comeback. It's why the Soviets had a world-class broadcast system but lousy phones, because they didn't want people to talk together. And NPR is a perfect example of one-way communication. It just comes out. I see what's going on online with what stuff you do as the next generation of that two-way conversation. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Well, it's a fair way, and I think it's the true way. There's a reason, actually, that at colleges these days, that it's always conservatives and libertarians and people sort of on the right that are getting deplatformed. So if I go speak, or Shapiro or some of these other people that we mentioned, there's a reason that it's not just protesters. As you guys all know, protesting is the most American thing you can do. I welcome protesters. I often go out to the street and I'll talk to the protesters, and usually you'll find pretty quickly that they don't really know what your positions are, and they actually don't even know what their own positions are, which is pretty fascinating, and you can find that out pretty quickly if you talk to them. But there's a reason that they're trying to deplatform everyone. There's a reason.
Give me a definition. What is deplatforming?
So deplatforming, in effect, is that if a speaker is invited to an accredited university, then the university has a responsibility, certainly a public university, but I would argue a private university as well, but absolutely a public university. The university then has a responsibility to ensure that the speaker can speak safely on campus. I've been invited, when I was at the University of New Hampshire, we had about 500 kids coming to see me, and due to protest, they said we can't even hold this event on campus, and they did it at a hockey rink off campus which sat about 5,000 people. And then I was talking to 500 people. But think what a defeat that is. We can't even secure our own university. To talk about I talk about what I think are mainstream moderate ideas. And that's becoming too controversial for these people. But there's a reason that the deplatforming and the silencing of dissent is only coming from one side. And it's sort of what I alluded to earlier, which is that they've become fat on their ideas. That the mainstream progressive groupthink has been accepted for so long that if they hear anything that's remotely out of that, they don't know what to do with it. It doesn't work. So, for example, if you say I see this all the time on college campuses, if you say you're for low taxes, they will quite literally say you're racist. I mean, I am not making this up. They will say you're racist. So my friend Eric Weinstein, who comes on the show often, who's an intellectual dark web member, he says, you should always steel man ideas. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt here. So in their minds, what they're saying is that if you're for low taxes, you don't like poor people. And then the next step of what they're saying is, well, if you don't like poor people, you don't like black people. Now, in and of itself, that's racist because there are actually more poor white people, but without unpacking all of that, that really is how simplistic their arguments are. And if you know a couple factoids that you can throw in their face, if you can say to them, how was this country set up? The whole idea of having states' rights was so that you guys here in Colorado could be one of the first to have recreational marijuana, let's say. And you know what? If it worked out well, which it seems to be for the economy, and you guys can tax it and all of those things, well, then some people can move here if it's important to them. And if you really...
They don't have to move here.
If
you could let them know that.
Every single person
there are a lot of other states.
Every single person that I've met here has said to me, stop telling people from California to come here. They're turning it into Little California. Yeah, we're like parasites. I don't know what I can tell.
I think all of us have this concern that we failed younger generations, that they don't understand even these principles of liberty, that those of us who grew up in Colorado, it was like these principles were just in the soil here. Mm-hmm. You couldn't be raised here without just getting it by osmosis. How are we reaching the young? And since we don't understand the intellectual dark web, first give me a definition of that. And is it working? Is it penetrating because we don't know?
Okay, so for those of you that don't know the intellectual dark web, it was a phrase that was coined by Eric Weinstein, who is an economist and mathematician. He's the head of Thiel Capital. I'm sure many of you know Peter Thiel. And what he was trying to give a name to was that over the last couple of years, because of the failure of mainstream media and CNN and Fox and all of the cable news networks that have just, whether you lean one way or not, that are just constantly pitting us at odds with each other, that suddenly what started to happen was there was long form conversation happening online. I mean, I started my show in September, the current version of my show in September of 2015, and people kept saying to me, you can't do an interview show, you can't just sit with somebody for an hour with no breaks and no gotcha moments and no clips. I mean, this is when Vine was coming out on people's phones, 6-second repetitive videos. And I thought, this is making us dumb. It's actually making us dumb. People don't know basic ideas. Why is liberty important? Young people actually don't understand it. So as I said earlier, when Bernie comes out with these ideas, free college, free this, or universal basic income, which is now a big one, and I've actually heard some interesting libertarian arguments for it, people just think, oh, yes, I'm supposed to get things. I should get things. And there's billionaires? Well, we should take from them and give to other people. They actually have never been given the opportunity to really think these things through. So basically, myself and Joe Rogan started doing these long-form podcasts, and suddenly what we found was, not only was there a thirst for it, but we started talking to scientists and authors and thinkers and comedians, and there were all these people. And most interestingly, which is sort of funny because I only get invited to conservative and libertarian events, most of these people were liberals. They were liberals who were suddenly mugged by reality. That's the way I would describe it. They were suddenly mugged by what the progressive movement has become.
Is there hope to turn them? Justin Longo, who helps us with Complete Colorado, once said to me years ago, these guys we fight, these progressives, a lot of them are just one good econ lesson away from being us. Yeah. They've never been exposed to this. Have you found that in your conversations? And is it possible for some of these people who obviously want good outcomes, they want their kids to be safe, they want food on the table, they don't want people to be discriminated against, is there a way to reach them?
Yeah, well,
what is that one economics lesson?
Well, first off, I don't think most of these people are bad. Look, there are bad people.
That's because you're young and not smart yet.
No, well, what I was going to say is, I think the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So the bulk of these people, they have the wrong ideas and they've been misled, and it's the fault of our education system and our media, and maybe it's the fault of some parenting and the rest of it. But yes, are there some bad people out there that are sort of leading this movement? Absolutely. I mean, AOC, the woman has literally, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's never accomplished anything in her life, except that she became a congresswoman with 15,000 votes. And then what did they say? They quite literally handed her this Green New Deal. Why don't you rejigger the entire US economy, even though you've never done anything? I mean, these are bad ideas, and if they get exposed...
And just so you know, those people are now in control of Colorado's government. From top to bottom, it is AOC right now.
That's why I'm leaving tonight, by the way, because I've heard many times I moved my flight earlier. No, look, how do you break through to these people? The way you break through to these people, I think first, and I think we've seen some of this happening, is that young people seem to be more interested in and really obsessed with the social issues, right? So gay marriage was very important to young people. Legalizing marijuana is very important to young people. And I think the simplest way you can frame it to them, look, gay marriage, for example, it's the most obvious libertarian argument there is. The government simply has no right to tell two consenting adults what contract they can or cannot get in. That is a beautiful libertarian argument that really, if the Republicans had been a little wiser per se, or if they hadn't gotten so tied in with the religious right, it's a whole other topic, but if they had been a little more true to their small government principles, that is something that they could have been cheerleading for a long time.
Take that for a second and bring it to Jack Phillips, who's here in Colorado, the cake baker, who went all the way to the Supreme Court for his right to say, no, I'm not going to put my creative arts to something I disagree with. So many people say, no, he can't discriminate. We were going to force him to create for us.
Yeah, so I took what was an unpopular position as a liberal, which is that of course you cannot force this person who owns a private business to do a specific thing. Now look, there's an interesting libertarian argument about, from the 1963 or 1964 Civil Rights Act, whether a store or any business could just refuse business to anyone. So then they could refuse business to black people or to gay people or to anyone. There's a libertarian argument for that. I'm not for relitigating that, but what I would say is if it's a unique product, then the government has no right to tell you what to do. I mean, if there was a Jewish painter that was painting commissions online, would you force her to bake, or would you force her to paint Nazi imagery? Of course not, right? Would you force a Muslim baker to bake a cake for a Christian wedding, or just we could come up with a zillion reasons why the government...
I find it fascinating that in all these cases that pop up of cake bakers, they're all Christians. Funny they didn't find any Muslim bakers to ask, because none of them would have done it either.
No, of course they wouldn't have done it. And this, look, this is part of what's going on with the left these days. I mean, you can look at the sort of outrage over the Christchurch shootings, which were horrific. There is no question about it. I mean, this is the true epitome of evil. But you look at their sort of over-the-top reaction when then they condemn, the idea is, well, let's condemn Trump, let's condemn all white people, let's condemn all Christian people, let's condemn all conservative people. And then you look at the reaction of what happened on Easter Day in Sri Lanka, and AOC actually didn't tweet about it for a couple days. And these things aren't coincidences. They really believe that oppression and sympathy and empathy can only come when it's certain people that are hit, and it's usually based on their skin color, which of course is so bizarre because they're the ones constantly preaching about diversity.
Let's dive into this identity politics, which is just surrounding us in Colorado. It's argued nationally, but here in Colorado we have a new sex ed bill, which has nothing to do with teaching kids how babies are made, but how to have a healthy transsexual relationship. And the oversight committee was going to be made of people who are from groups that are or have been discriminated against. So we know what that is. There is a Civics Bill that's being put in to change how we teach civics. And the same people who rightly idolize Martin Luther King for saying, judge me by the content of my character, not the color of my skin, their new oversight committee in this bill requires 2 black people, 2 Latino people, 2 Asian people, and 1 LGBT person. So basically, if the only way you can get into this, if you're Irish, because it's like Irish need not apply because you're not in the right identity politics, unless you want to start cross-dressing, and then you can get in. But what is this victim celebration? Because my 16-year-old daughter's here, and in her public high school, it is showered in victim celebration. That's all it is a race to see who's been oppressed.
Yeah, so what I call this is the oppression Olympics. I mean, basically you have a set of people out there who believe that victimhood is virtue. That if you can show that you are a victim based on an immutable characteristic, so based on your gender or your sexuality or your skin color or a series of other things, if you can show that you are the biggest victim, that you actually move up in the hierarchy of this oppression Olympics. And oddly, what they hold at the top of that as progressives, it's really bizarre, is what they hold at the top is Islam, which is the least progressive set of ideas that there is. So but there's not a total coincidence of that, because they're both sort of totalitarian in nature. They both want centralized control, one in a religious manner and one in a state manner. It's the complete reverse of Martin Luther King. He wanted his children, as you said, to be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And this is what they have, not only have they done this, but actually what they're doing, what you just laid out there, all right, well, we need 2 Latino people to do this, and we need 2 black people to do this, and we need a gay guy to do this. And well, that is prejudice. That is prejudice. Imagine if I looked out in the crowd and I just thought, all right, well, you're a woman, so you must think that, and you're a black person, so you must think that. That's the story that I was telling you about David Webb before. But this has become mainstream thought. And what it really is nothing more than just an exceptionally low resolution argument. To say you're for gay people means nothing, actually. To say you're for women means nothing. What you should be for is for equality. You should make sure that every single person that is a citizen of the United States of America lives under the same exact rules. Guess what? Some people are going to come from more. Some people are going to come from less. Some people are born with a limp. Some people are able-bodied. The rest of it. We can do all those things. But what they're trying to do is institutionalize this stuff. And then at the same time, we're going to give you free college, where we're going to brainwash you with this so that the next generation won't even have the slightest semblance of what freedom and liberty and some of the other things we've talked about here are.
I have a hope that this identity politics creates its own gravitational force, which makes it implode. And you're seeing this now, because you can't just keep dividing people into smaller and smaller boxes. And as they compete for the better box, you find someone like Elizabeth Warren, who is a victim because she's a woman, but she's also a victim because she's Indian. And so, wait a second, the Indians are saying, you're not really a victim.
Right, but
and
who's
before you know it, the victims, what was the old Alfred Hitchcock movie where they're all in the boat, and there's in the lifeboat, and before they know it, they're thinking, we all could live, but you have to go out. And pretty soon, when there's that many victim groups, some victim group is going to be less victim-y than the others.
Well, this is the bizarre spot that the left finds itself in, because this set of ideas, you're right, they believe that their competing victimhoods could somehow together, I mean, this is what the concept of intersectionality is, that if you take all of these victim groups, that somehow if they can all sort of accept...
You use that word again, because I did that in my column, and I got 15 emails going,
what is intersectionality?
Exactly.
Intersectionality.
This is a thing now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because these words just start popping up, and then they become sort of these accepted things as if they're just accepted as reality. But the basic premise behind intersectionality is that you can take all of these groups based on the immutable characteristics that we've discussed here, sexuality and gender, and all of these things, and color of skin, and that if you can somehow combine them into some weird, unholy political alliance, that intersectional relationship will be stronger together. But in fact, what it does is exactly what you just laid out there, which is why Bernie Sanders, when he tried to speak at a Black Lives Matter event, what happened? The activist just grabbed the mic out of his hand, because he is, at the end of the day, he may be their socialist king, but he's just an old white man. And you're
Who,
seeing,
by the way, is now a millionaire by selling books.
he became, he's a millionaire with 3 houses, and I know no one in this room begrudges him those things.
I do.
Well, you want an individual to be able to accomplish all of those things in the United States. He's preaching the ideas that will stop future Bernie Sanders, I suppose.
That's the other part I have such a hard time, particularly trying to teach the young, is that they are declaring war on the things that have given them the greatest life in the history of mankind. They are destroying the very thing that has given them homes, that has given them medicine, that has given them education, that has given them a life expectancy unheard of.
We're working on it.
Are
We're
they too
working
dumb
on
to
it.
understand
well,
that?
it's not that they're dumb.
Case in point, we have PETA. PETA. Now, only in a society where you have plenty of food to eat are you trying to save a dog from being eaten. In any other starving world, that stray cat is dinner. But now this is a cause célèbre because we have so much. There's an economic theory that we've hit the height of capitalism because now we want for nothing. Our basic needs are filled, so now we can do ethereal things like destroy capitalism.
Yeah, I think, well, this is the odd position that we're at right now. And this is why I always bring up this thing about nobody ever leaving. If you ask a lot of the lefties, if you ask progressives, well, where is it better? Because they'll tell you America is this sort of evil, patriarchal, oppressive. They love oppression. They always tell you that America's oppressing people. If you live in America, in 2019, you are the least oppressed person in the history of the world. You better thank your lucky stars every day that you're growing up in America in 2019. You can do you have the opportunity. It doesn't mean you're going to do it, but you have the chance to do whatever you want. That is an incredible thing. But what they'll always tell you is they'll always say, well, the Scandinavian countries are doing it right. That's what they always say. Now, I was in Sweden, I was in Finland, I was in Norway, a couple of other countries there. And it's actually completely fascinating what's going on there. Now, first off, these are absurdly tiny countries with a couple million people. We've got about 350 million people here. We also have a melting pot where we have welcomed in more people from more walks of life than any country in the history of the world. Every single person from every corner on the earth lives in the United States. I'm sure most of you have been on a subway in New York City, and everyone is on there, and we should be killing each other, but we're not. We're not, because we've done something right. The melting pot is right. But what's interesting is that's happening in Sweden right now is so they're a tiny country that was a majority, 97% white country. Now they have a massive problem with immigration, right, and integration, and they don't know what to do with that. And now they're having all sorts of problems. But even more interestingly than that is that Sweden did egalitarianism right. They have treated, men and women have been completely equal for now decades in Sweden. And what happened? Well, you would have thought that everyone would just do whatever job anyone wants to do, and it would all shake its way out. But what's actually happened is that in Sweden, where anyone could do anything, what they found is, and this is what the progressives and the feminists and the postmodernists can't stand, they found that despite the evening of the playing field, a completely egalitarian society, that women still become nurses and men still become engineers. So now there's a new push. Sweden has the first ever sworn-in feminist government. And there is a new push to actually, in effect, force more women to become engineers and force more men to become nurses, because that will somehow make the system more fair. Because they don't want us to have any of the actually human inherent traits that we have. So I think there's a lot of ways of disassembling some of their bad arguments. But the simplest ones are the ones that you can really just throw in their face. Tell me about your grandparent.
I'm looking for.
You got it better or worse?
I'm looking for some hope that we can change the culture. At the Independence Institute, we always say that politics is the lagging indicator of change. It's culture that is the leading indicator. It's why we focus on the levers of political culture. And I think one of the problems that our team has, particularly in this state, is we're fascinated by politics. We're fascinated by personality. If only this guy gets nominated, if only we beat that person there, then everything's going to be be okay. And that's never the case, because even if we get our guy there, we drop him into these buzzsaws of the political culture where we get disappointed when they turn soft. The left in this state has spent the last 15 years doing what independence does, but they funded it fully so that they've got the think tanks, they've got the data, they've got the action tanks, they've got the groups that go out and sue, they've got it all. That's what changes culture. Now, I sometimes I'm hopeful that I look at college kids, and there's some college Republicans here today. Apparently, their dorm mother left them out, and that there seems to be the same frustration on college campuses that I heard about in the 60s. But now it's conservatives who can't speak. The problem is conservatives on college campuses are not going to go and take over the dean's office because, well, they follow the rules.
Right.
So give me some hope for the young.
Well, to that part, I mean, that gets to what I was saying about why is it that lefties are always protesting really mainstream conservative thinkers or anyone to the right. It's because they're so afraid of their ideas being challenged. The reason libertarians aren't out there shutting down the speakers, the socialist and the lefty speakers, is because it's very obvious if you let these ideas really be heard, really be fleshed out, these are terrible ideas. So it's not a problem to let them be heard. But I would say the cultural...
There's also something that we're a bunch of rule followers. If a bunch of conservative kids were going to riot in a train station, they would all buy tickets first. They're very polite. They've been raised that way.
Well, I would say don't change that. That solving, switching, using some of their tactics, which will be very tempting as this culture war heats up, would be the wrong idea, right? You don't want to give up your ideals and play the same dirty game that they're playing. I think that's pretty obvious. I think...
Wait. Why is that obvious? Because we're looking around here in Colorado, and for decades, we have been right. And I'm getting tired of being right.
Yeah.
I want to win. And once they started doing more character assassination, once they started stuffing ballot box, once they did same-day voter registration, once they did mail-in ballots, once they started scaring people into doing these things, once they attacked people using those great Saul Lewinsky tactics, they started to win. I want to win, Dave.
Yeah, so this is an incredible philosophic debate, right? And I have this with libertarians all the time, because libertarians don't want to do some of the low-handed tactics that will be used against them, because they also don't want to, and I get this, I don't want to use state power to silence my enemies, my ideological enemies, the way that they would be happy to do it to us. And so this is a really tough spot to be in. But I would say if you throw out all of the things that you believe in it, so that you buy into all the Alinsky tactics and you do all of those things and rules for radicals, well, then we're really at the end of the American experiment. But I get the
hang on a
position
second,
here.
because I disagree with some of that.
Yeah.
Saul Lewinsky said, "Hold them, your opponents, to their own standards." If a politician says, I'm going to handwrite a response to every letter I get in, well, we're going to send you 1 million letters to tie you up. We will hold you to your own standards. I want to hold them to their own standards.
So I would say the best way you can fight this is that look, Trump the Trump idea, was the MAGA idea, was it a political idea or a cultural idea? Was it a response to politics or to culture? It was obviously a response to culture. It was a response to an exhausted people who were tired of being called bigots and racists. It was an exhaustion of political correctness. It was an exhaustion of people thinking one thing privately as if they're so horrible and knowing it's not true, but not even being able to tell it to anyone. And that's why it grew online, right? It grew on Twitter and it grew on YouTube, and partly through this intellectual dark web, because there was no outlet to have sensible conversation about anything. I would say if you really want to take things back, and I see this happening, it's why I'm here, it's why people care about the intellectual dark web and why people watch these shows, start winning through comedy, start winning through art, through some of these other things. Win through TV shows and make better movies. Look, I've been on tour for the last year with Jordan Peterson. Make better stories. There's a reason that they've sort of killed comedy right now.
Yeah, a couple of things though. One of the things the left does so well is build comedy. They build movies. They build music. When we do it, it ain't so good. But then again, I wouldn't want them to build bridges. I want these people to be building the bridges.
Yeah.
And therefore we don't have that kind of skill.
Look,
I see flashes. I see things like South Park. I see ways of doing that. Let me throw one more at you. Saul Lewinsky said, "Get inside the machine." He told the hippies to cut their hair, put on a necktie, get inside the machine and destroy it from within. The work that Kathleen Chandler does is not that different. She's trying to get people to get inside local government, to go on these boards and commissions and get inside and free us from the inside. Let's use some of those tactics. Those work, and there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah, well, that's why it seems to me that the work that you guys are doing here actually is effective. That people that are liberty-minded need to start acting like it actually matters, need to really start doing things at a local level. We have this is part of celebrity culture, and it's part of meme culture and the way we get news and everything. The obsession with 1/3 of the government, the obsession with Trump, who is just 1/3 of the government, is unhealthy. I mean, we should be fixing things in our backyard before we fix things, and just have this obsessive, I think it's sort of a symptom of sort of a sick society when everything has become political. I mean, does it feel like to you guys that everything has become political all the time, right? Like, if you turn on ESPN right now, I guarantee you they're doing something political. Within 2 minutes of watching, they'll do NBA playoffs and then it's something political or it's something racial. And this is actually, we're running out of spaces where we can actually just be citizens together. This is the great catch-22, by the way, of the internet. For generations and for decades, you could get your news from ABC, CBS, NBC. You could watch Walter Cronkite or whoever you liked, and you basically, whatever channel, one channel maybe was a little more this way, one was a little more this way, but as Americans, we basically had a certain window that you could see things through. Now, of course, you can argue this is terrible because there's more ideas out there and we should have let more voices in there and all of these things. But we had a certain common set of ideas that we could coalesce around. So the catch-22 of the internet, and I think what I'm trying to deal with, and I think what's for anyone that cares about freedom, where we want things to be as decentralized as possible, right? We want as many voices out there as possible. We want to win a war of ideas and all of these things. Well, what if we really run out of spaces where we can actually set these differences aside? And then, when you think about fake news and the rest of it, it's like, what if we actually can't agree on anything? And I think that that's what's happening there. We're running out of spaces where we can really do these types of things. And that's what we have to fix. That's what I think my crew has been trying to do.
I'll tell you what, for those of us who aren't as plugged into the web, and we need to wind down here, where do you recommend we go? So I get this from a lot of folks, which is, I hear there's so much great stuff out there somewhere.
Yeah.
The nice thing about radio is there's so many stations, you find a voice you hear. What is out there? It's scary out there. There's where do we go?
Yeah, I get this one a lot. I go to college campuses and students will come up to me and say, "Dave, you're the only person I trust." And I'm going to curse once tonight. I usually say to them, well, then we're really fucked. Because that's sort of the position that everyone sort of finds themselves in at the moment, which is nobody sort of knows who to trust. So look, it's on you now to figure out sources that are good. Are there some good sources out there? Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire. Look, they're doing things obviously from a right perspective, from a conservative perspective, but I think Ben is a responsible editor-in-chief of the site, and I think they're doing good work. You can find individual journalists. Tim Pool's an individual journalist who some of you may know. There's a guy, Andy No, up in Portland that's doing good work. It's getting harder and harder to do, but I would say more than anything else, watch some of these shows, whether it's my show or Joe Rogan, or listen to some of these shows, because there's a whole other set of ideas that you can hear about and learn about.
As stupid as it sounds,
yeah.
How do we do that?
How do you do it?
How do you do that?
Like, are we at like, how do you turn on your computer?
How do you turn on your computer? No,
this
really.
is like my mom calls me every day. How do I turn on my computer? All right.
What site? Give me the site. Is there a site where people go and say, here are the ones I think you might enjoy?
So I would say dailywire.com, which is Ben Shapiro's site, is doing a pretty solid job of picking the right stories, giving solid analysis, and getting some of that out there. You can go to youtube.com/Rubin Report. That's my show. We have long-form conversations about these ideas. I just had on, this week, we had a guy who named Yoram Harzoni who wrote a book called Virtue of Nationalism. Now, you hear the word nationalism a lot these days, and it's always framed as if you're a nationalist, meaning you care about your country, somehow you're a racist. Well, he actually explains the roots of nationalism and that how nationalism allowed us to create individual states all over the world that actually allowed people to become the freest people have ever been, which they are right now by and large. You can listen to Joe Rogan's podcast.
And what I think a lot of folks don't get, and it took me a while to do this, is you can download these things onto your phone. You can listen to them in the car. And for fear of every AM radio listener, there's rarely a commercial, if ever.
Yeah, once in a while.
So instead of suffering through 20 minutes of commercials during rush, you can skip through all of that and get right to the meat of it. I tell you what, let's grab like just one or two questions if there's folks that want to ask Dave something, and we'll wrap that up. Let's see. Uh-oh. This is the babysitter time. Right over here.
Could you just talk quickly on free speech and technology and sort of the conversation that's going on around surveillance capitalism and sort of all issue about whose data is it?
Yeah.
The question is about free speech, data, the surveillance state. Where's it all going?
So I'm glad you brought this up because I should have got to this earlier. I mean, I think the conversation around free speech and the tech companies and the amount of power that they now control over us, the amount of information that Google has over you, or if you have an Alexa in your house just this week, they're finding out that they know all sorts of other information about your address and all sorts of things, and that we don't own our digital selves. You put all of this stuff on Facebook, and Facebook owns your pictures. I mean, why is it all free? Because it's not free. You're the product. I mean, that really is the truth. And then what, of course, is happening that is very intimate to me and some of the people that I associate with is that they are making it very clear that if you talk about certain topics on YouTube, for example, so if I talk about actually pretty basic libertarian ideas or some of the things we've talked about here tonight, they won't monetize those videos. Now, that's not censorship. It's not a violation of the First Amendment, and they're not stopping me from putting videos up, but everyone has to make a living, or you want to make a living on the content that you produce. So there's a soft censorship that we have to fight. I think the answer to really a lot of this is blockchain technology, which is a whole other conversation that's probably not totally suited right now. But there's ways of decentralizing some of this so that you will own your digital self. There's a lot of companies trying to explore this right now because you don't own any of these things. We're constantly giving them more and more information about us, and it's incredibly dangerous.
To close a loop on that, one of the reasons the left has such power in Colorado is they took that big data in their databases. They called it Catalyst a few years ago. They match it up with the voter files, and they know how each and every one of you are going to vote. They have the data and they have the algorithms, and they can use that to pinpoint the people they want to get out to vote. With mail-in balloting, it means we have a month of those ballots coming in, and every day they check off who's voted, and they get to see the score. They know who's winning or losing well before Election Day because they know how you voted, because their data is that good. And with same-day voter registration, if they see that you're losing some here, they can just move people over and recruit people to vote. That's why college campuses are such plucking for that. One of the bills that is going through says that college campuses now will have to have voting centers in all Colorado college campuses. At the same time, the very same bill says police and law enforcement stations are barred from having a voting polling place. The reason is that when they want to activate new voters, they want to make it as easy as possible. They are building this, and it's why we've lost. I tell you what, why don't you wrap it up for us and give us some hope for the future, point us in the right direction.
I'll give you a little hope. I will finish with one other thing on the tech side of this. This is a really interesting one philosophically, because I'm definitely one of the people that talks about ideas that the tech companies don't like, right? Like, so Silicon Valley, they're mostly progressives, which is sort of bizarre because they're the ones that are coming up with new technology, and I think personally and privately, many of them actually act as libertarians privately, but then publicly they put on this progressive face. But one of the interesting debates, I think probably the most interesting debate right now, is should these tech companies be regulated? And there's a growing movement I'm finding with conservatives saying yes. And I understand the impulse to do that they control all of this information, and it truly is unprecedented. And is this where government should intervene? I haven't moved on that yet. I still believe that competition is the answer, but it's really pushing my sort of freedom and liberty side to its limits, because at the end of the day, any of these companies, look, they have enough information on any of us. Nothing could stop Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google and everything else from shutting us all down tomorrow. And they could do that the day before the election. You know, it's a little dystopian in nature to think about it, but any of these things could happen. So it's a great philosophical debate, I think, that the libertarians and the conservatives are having right now. I would say more than anything else, if to end on a positive note, I'll go back to what I started with, which that the young people at this table are paying attention to these ideas. I was not paying attention to these ideas when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. There is a true movement happening worldwide. A guy like Jordan Peterson, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, clinical psychologist out of Toronto, and what put him on the map? Well, Canada was going to pass a bill, C-17, that could criminalize speech so that if you misgendered someone, even accidentally, if you were walking down the street and you thought it was a man, but it turned out to be a woman, and you said, sir, you could actually be fined or imprisoned. Well, he fought that. I mean, it's absolutely patently absurd, right? He fought it. He was called a transphobe and a bigot and a racist and the rest of it, but he fought it. And guess what? The guy wrote a book, 12 Rules for Life. That's the tour I was on with him. And he sold 5 million copies worldwide. And when we walked down the streets in Copenhagen, we were mobbed by people. So there is something building. It's hard to see, and especially if you're really tuned into mainstream news, it's going to be framed all the wrong ways, all of the wrong ways. But there's an incredible movement growing, and I would say for you guys, figure out ways to help, whether it's through dollars or volunteering or whatever it is. Figure out ways to help some of the creators that are making some of the content that allows some of these young people to hear these ideas, or start helping more of them get into the right schools, because they're not all fully taken over by the social justice warriors. University of Chicago did a really great defense of free speech. There are some schools that are doing that sort of thing. So I'm hopeful. I would say I'm a world-weary optimist. You know, there's a lot of reasons to not be hopeful right now, but you know, generations before us have been through a lot worse than this, and we'll get through this thing. And hopefully we don't have to sacrifice all our principles that we've talked about here to accomplish that.
Let's thank David for spending some time with us.
Thank you guys very much. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
I tell you what, let me again thank all of you for what you do for the Independence Institute, for what we've been able to do for the last 35 years. I want to thank John Andrews for creating the Independence Institute and the incredible change it's made to Colorado. And if he didn't create that, Tom Tancredo would never have had a job, and the only thing I'd be saying in a microphone is, would you like fries with that? So thank you for that. The other part of this is something glorious. I feel like we are truly blessed to be here now in the state where the biggest leftist takeover is going on, that we are here defending the last bit of liberty in Colorado. When Colorado goes out under this plan, Texas is not far back. When Texas goes, everything goes. We need to find the antidote to what they've done to Colorado so that we can inoculate other states. And we're blessed to be in this fight here, now, and it's us. So the question is, do we retreat or do we fight like there is no tomorrow? We at the Independence Institute have decided to fight like there's no tomorrow, and that's because you give us the ammunition. Thank you so much, and have a spectacular evening, and we'll do this again in about a year. Thank you.
Yeah.